With this video, we would like to provide an overview about CEEGEX and HUDEX gas markets collective default fund, the contribution calculation to the default fund, and the sizing methodology of the default fund. EMIR and the related technical standard define mandatory standards with regards to the calculation of the default funds. Keller CCP operates one default fund for the CEEGEX spot and HUDEX derivative gas market. The gas market clearing members have to contribute to the default fund who participate either on CEEGEX or HUDEX market. The minimum required amount to be contributed is €15,000. The level of the contribution that shall be paid by the clearing members is determined by Keller CCP on a monthly basis. The date of the calculation is the first clearing day for each month, and the settlement of the contribution by the clearing members is the second clearing day after the determination, and the deadline is 9 a.m. In case of insufficient size of the default fund, Keller CCP can order extraordinary recalculation anytime during the month. Insufficient is the default fund when the stress test results are higher than the size of the default fund. The calculation and sizing methodology of the default fund is published in our webpage, a related announcement. According to the aforementioned regulations, EMIR and its technical standard, the results of Keller CCP's daily stress tests are the basis of the calculations. The default fund shall at least enable the CCP to withstand under extreme but plausible market conditions the default of the clearing member to which it has the largest exposure, or of the second and third largest clearing members if the sum of their exposure is larger. The exposures are the results of daily stress test calculations, which are based on different scenarios of extreme but plausible market conditions. The amount of the exposure depends on the difference between the calculated or stressed variation margins and the initial margin. There are two steps in the calculation method for the default funds. The first one is the determination of the necessary size of the default fund, and the second one is the calculation of the contributions by the clearing members. On this slide, you may see the determination of the necessary size of the default fund. The default fund is marked with DF, which is the result of the calculation on a monthly basis. The formula has four components. The maximum of these four components is the result of the calculation, and that shall be the newly calculated size of the default fund. In the formula you may see XY, and XY is the result of daily stress tests, which is executed by Keller CCP. The amount of the default of the clearing member to which Keller CCP has the largest exposures, or of the second and third largest clearing members if the sum of their exposure is larger. So that is XY, which is applied and embedded in the formula. As I mentioned, that the four components maximum is the result of the sizing methodology that is equal with the size of the default fund. The first component is the maximum of the mentioned XY values for 63 days. The second component is the minimum of two other components. The first is the maximum of the XY values for 63 days multiplied with the procyclical correction parameter. And the other parameter or component is the previous month's default fund multiplied with another component, the P2, which is 1.1. So the minimum of these two components is the second component of the sizing methodology. The third component is considering XY again. Keller CCP calculates the expected value or the arithmetic mean of this XY for 63 days and adds the multiplied standard deviation of these XYs for 63 days. The multiplier for the standard deviation is called alpha, which values is 3. And the fourth component is the previous month's default fund size multiplied with P1, which is 0.9. With this methodology, Keller CCP would like to keep the size of a default fund within a range that is not so volatile, and no sudden changes are in the size of the default fund. The methodology and the parameters of the default fund sizing are revised annually, except the PK parameter, which is revised quarterly. After we calculated the necessary size of the CEEGEX HUDEX gas market default fund, the last step is to determine the contributions of the clearing members to the default fund. I would like to highlight that Keller CCP updated its contribution calculation in 2021. So this calculation methodology for the contributions is effective from the 1st of February 2021. With this new methodology, we avoid the oversizing of the default fund, and the result is a more fair contribution for every member. The update is related to the introduction of the MC parameter, which has two values, 1 or 0, and these parameters are calculated based on the initial margins and the default fund minimum contribution and the necessary size of the default fund. This MC parameter, which is 0 or 1, is multiplied with the minimum contribution to the default fund, and these are cumulated and extracted from the necessary size of the default fund. This result is multiplied with the weight for every member calculated based on the initial margin and the total initial margin for every member where the MC is 0. This parameter or this component is considered, and the minimum default fund contribution, which is 15,000 euro, and the highest of these two has to be rounded up to 1,000 euros, and that is the result of the contribution for the member.